Thank you. Okay, so apparently everything I just said was gold, but none of you could hear it, so I guess I'll start over again. My name is Melanie Trecek-King, and I am an associate professor of biology at Massasoit Community College in Massachusetts. And I am also the creator of a website called Thinking is Power that is a critical thinking, science literacy, information literacy website with the goal of empowering people to make better decisions. I would love to hear everyone who is here. I hope you can hear me now. And please tell me where you're from or what brought you here. Put questions in the comments, please. So I think I'll maybe wait a minute longer before I start. You can follow me on Facebook if you're not already at Thinking is Power. And on Twitter, my Twitter handle is @ThinkingPowers. And my website again is thinkingispower.com. Would love to see you all on social. Okay. Yeah, that's a cello, Leah. My husband is, hi Leah. My husband is a professional musician. He's a choral conductor, but his primary instrument is a cello. So we have all kinds of, let me just go the other way. We have all kinds of musical instruments in the background. We also travel a lot, and we tend to collect instruments on our travels. So some of those are just really fun from our travels. Okay. Ooh, Georgia. Okay, excellent. So, as you've probably guessed, I am not a dietitian. I'm a biologist. Actually, my undergrad was biology and chemistry, and then in graduate school, I studied ecology, specifically prairie ecology and fire ecology. I'm originally from Iowa and lived in Nebraska for quite some time, but we live in Massachusetts now. I think I'm going to go ahead and start. Please continue to put comments in the comment section. I would love to know about you and any questions you may have. So I'm an associate professor of biology, and my specialty is teaching science courses for non-major students, so students who are not going to be scientists when they grow up. And I spent a really long time teaching biology, which I love, but my students not so much, and quite frankly it was just a lot for them to memorize, and so I figured there had to be a better way. I didn't feel like I was equipping my students to be able to navigate their lives in a way that helps them make good decisions. So I developed a course that focuses on skills, not facts. Things like information literacy, science literacy, and importantly, critical thinking. And Thinking is Power came out of that class. The basic idea is that we can, through critical thinking, through better thinking, make better decisions and have a better life. The skills of critical thinking and information literacy, etc., hopefully can help people, not just now, but as the science information landscape changes as well. So Thinking is Power has the basics of the course in there. My thought with Thinking is Power was that I had what I thought worked with the class, and I wanted to share it with people and see if anybody else was interested as well. So there's a critical thinking foundations, what I'm calling a foundations course on there. But critical thinking is a set of skills that's applicable to a variety of different areas. And so what I was trying to do was make that information available to people in general. So on there I have things about like basic epistemology, how we come to our beliefs, and metacognition, understanding our thought processes. Things like how to be a good consumer of information, what science is, how it's different than science denial and pseudoscience, different types of pseudoscience, so things like alternative medicine and fad diets. So again, I'm on Twitter at Thinking Powers and on Facebook. So I share those things there. With my students, so I know a lot of you are dietitians, and I am not, but I imagine your clients to be very similar to, you're educating your clients. And so when I'm educating my students, I'm trying to help them understand how they think, why they fall for misinformation, and help them navigate an information ecosystem to make better decisions. And that involves understanding our errors in thinking and being good consumers of information. Yeah. Okay, so I'm getting a question here from Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. With so much conflicting, incomplete, and sensational information in the news, how could we identify trustworthy information? And people without science backgrounds often like to read scientific studies. Nutrition is a really difficult area, as you are all aware. When most people throughout their lives seem to, the vast majority of what they consume as far as science information is concerned, it has to do with health. So, and a lot of that is diet. But not all scientific studies are created equal, and nutrition is particularly difficult. It's not like we can do placebo-controlled trials. There's a lot of observational studies where data is just collected in the real world, so there's a lot of correlations. We don't get causation, and then the media picks that stuff up. So the media, the news, tends to focus on what's new or findings that seem contradictory to what we already know. So the media is constantly chasing the frontiers of science. But when we're talking about what we understand about something like nutrition science, so there's a body of knowledge, and the media tends to not be as interested so much in just rehashing the findings that we have more confidence in, which is really a shame. So, but people need to find good information. And so I actually wrote a post about how to do your own research. People seem to be doing their own research a lot these days, and there's a lot of back and forth about what research is and how to do good research. But the gist is that the scientific consensus is the most reliable form of knowledge for people who are not experts. And so what does the scientific consensus look like? What is a scientific consensus? Why is it reliable? And people trust the scientific consensus. It's why denial campaigns tend to focus on convincing people that there's not a consensus or denying the importance of one. But for the average person then, let's say that I'm going online and I'm trying to find out what kind of diet is the most helpful or has the best evidence behind it. The scientific consensus is the best way to go. So how do you find a consensus in these different areas? It requires an understanding of the difference between so the different kinds of professional organizations in different areas. So nutritionists, I'm assuming, have dietitians, I should say, have their own scientific organizations. So they may have position statements or systematic reviews or meta-analyses. And so if you're looking for a particular question, making sure that you're using Google in an unbiased way. A lot of us like to lead Google in our search. So, but making our search terms neutral, and then finding those sites that are the most reliable. And reliable information is available online, but a lot of it, we have to know what we're doing when we're on there. See if I have any more questions. Yeah, so information ecosystem. Yeah, people without scientific backgrounds like to read scientific studies, but they don't necessarily know how to interpret or to read them. This is a really hard one because we tend to like to, if we have an idea of what we think is true, we like to confirm that we're right. So the most important thing, I think, is for people to understand what their own biases are, and try to get out of their own way as much as possible. I'm not a big fan, actually, of sending the average person to the scientific literature. I know other educators like to, even with their general courses, teach their students to read scientific literature, and I think it's actually prescription for disaster. I'm an ecologist. I wouldn't necessarily really understand a lot of the literature in various diets. I might be able to make my way through a study, but it doesn't mean that I actually understand it. And I can't put it in context with the rest of what we know, the bigger body of literature. And I wouldn't necessarily have an understanding of what kinds of methodologies are most common in that area, the kind of study that it is, and the evidence that it provides. So part of this is an intellectual humility thing and knowing our limits. And so I know my limits, that's not my thing. And so what I would do is try to encourage some intellectual humility, trying to get people to understand that experts really do know more than they do, and to encourage them, instead of going to the scientific literature, finding back to that expert consensus thing again. But back to understanding the scientific literature, we tend to have an overinflated sense of what we know, but also we've led Google, like we just previously talked about. So if I go to even Google Scholar and I type in something to find a study, I can cherry pick a study to basically say anything that I want to say, right? I can find a study to support my views. The better question is, what does the body of evidence say? And that requires expertise, and none of us are able to be experts in everything. So, and intellectual humility, and finding an expert consensus, and trying to get people to understand that the scientific literature isn't for you. It's not for non-experts. That's where experts talk to each other. And so the question isn't what a particular study says, it's what does the body of evidence says. And that requires an expertise to understand what it is that we're reading. So I'm just looking through to see if there's any other questions in here. Oh, yeah, so I'm a huge fan of intellectual humility. Ironically, the people who need to hear that message the most are probably the least likely to hear it. Especially if they have something in mind that they already want to believe. Sorry, scrolling through the questions. Yeah, how cognitive biases would mislead people. So, one of the things about pseudoscience, and I would lump a lot of fad diets into pseudoscience, is that they prey on our hopes. They prey on our fears, what we want to believe. And so they offer simple, quick fixes. They offer certainty. And those things are powerful, but they're illusions. So the biggest bias that impacts all of this, of course, is confirmation bias. But, you know, our emotions are really at play here. I'm just take a slight tangent here. I don't know if any of you have heard of the rider and the elephant analogy. Jonathan Haidt's dual processing theory of how our brain processes information. And the basic idea is that there's, if in our brain, if you imagine there's an elephant and then there's a rider that sits on top of the elephant. And the elephant is emotional, it's intuitive. It very easily jumps to conclusions based on its expectations and its biases and so on. And the rider's just along for a ride. So the rider you think is you. It's the part of your brain that's capable of rational thought and using evidence to come to a conclusion, but it's not in control. And we fool ourselves by thinking that it is. And so most of the time, your rider is just along for a ride, and it goes where the elephant wants to go. And so, you know, with health in particular, you know, I, for example, know that in the evenings I tend to stress eat. It's finally when I wind myself down, and I really like sweets. And my writer knows that I shouldn't be doing that, but my elephant really wants to. And so instead of my writer being in control and telling my elephant, you know what, you probably shouldn't eat that, my writer justifies what my elephant wants to do. And my writer says, you know what, I won't eat as much tomorrow, or I didn't eat that much today, or I'll work out more the next day. And so it's a process of rationalization as opposed to reasoning. So when we want to understand the biases that our brain is doing, it's imperative to connect to our elephant and understand the emotional reasoning behind what our brain is up to. And so we're our biggest enemy. The reason that we fall for misinformation, or the reason that we fall for pseudoscience, is because we want to, because it offers us hope or simple solutions or certainty, or because we're afraid, or because we're angry. And so it helps to be aware of what the elephant is doing, so that the writer can learn how to convince the elephant to do something different. If there's a conflict between the writer and the elephant is going to win. So can the writer outsmart the elephant? And it can't do that unless you know what the elephant is up to. So I think I see a question there about, yeah, the appeal to authority and identifying expertise. And actually that's required. We talked about the expert consensus. And science, to be fair, does not have authorities. It has experts. But there's often, behind fad diets, there's an expert, somebody with a doctorate or something who's saying, you know, this diet here, I'm going to sell you this, etc. And that's a basic appeal to authority. So an appeal to authority is using a false authority, or an authority who's not in line with the expert consensus, to justify a claim. And so there's going to be someone with a doctorate or an advanced degree who, again, will make any claim that you want to hear, just like there's a scientific study that basically says anything. The question is, what does the vast majority of experts say? And so it's important to be able to evaluate the credentials of an expert, but they shouldn't be making a claim based on their expertise. They're making a claim based on the evaluation of the evidence. The system of science, how it plays out, is that as evidence accumulates, experts tend to accept various conclusions. And so when experts tend to agree, then that's the most reliable form of knowledge. Be wary of cherry picking any individual study or any individual expert who's making a claim. We've seen this with COVID. There are doctors who are making various claims about vaccines or treatments, etc. But they are outliers. They're often trying to sell people something. There's an ideological reason behind why they are making the claims that they are. They don't want to accept something based on their already ideological position. So yes, it's important to know the difference between experts and an appeal to authority. So just looking again through, are there any metacognition exercises? Oh, yikes. You know, that takes practice. That's a great question. So metacognition is thinking about our thinking, and that's, you know, the writer and the elephant. It's an understanding what the elephant is up to. It really takes practice. There's no shortcut. It takes practice, and all of us are susceptible to it. And, you know, we all have our different areas. So I often tell my students that it's easier to spot biases and fallacies in other people, especially people that we disagree with, than it is in ourselves. So when I'm starting with students at the beginning of the semester, I'll say, okay, here's some biases and here's the ways our reasoning goes astray. If it helps you, feel free seeing it in other people first. Don't call them out on it because nobody likes that, but identify it in other people. But the goal is identifying it in ourselves. And being honest with ourselves, with what our elephant wants to do, with the emotional reasons behind what we believe, is really the hardest part. And what'll happen is our elephant wants to believe something or doesn't want to believe something. And so our writers act like lawyers. And instead of following evidence to a conclusion, they cherry pick evidence to make the conclusion fit. They find the evidence they need to justify what the elephant wants to believe or doesn't want to believe. And so that step, though, of being skeptical of what you believe and being willing to be honest with ourselves is, I think, the most important step. No one can lie to us like we can. So an understanding of our own biases, our own hopes, our own fears, what it is that's driving our reasoning is really difficult, but it is definitely the most important step. Okay, so just looking through some of the other questions. Okay, so I have one here from earlier of, why do people fall for bad claims or for grifters? So that comes back to what our elephant wants. We all have the underlying reasons why we want or don't want to believe something. And so, something like pseudoscience or like a fad diet. A fad diet offers easy solutions. It offers simple answers. Clarity, good food, bad food. And so our elephant likes that. And we need the hope. I mean, something like, let's say, losing weight or eating more healthfully, that's a really challenging thing to do. There's food that tastes amazing that isn't helpful for us. And so, and there's, bad food is ubiquitous. Bad food, I don't necessarily like labeling food as bad, but, things like processed food or fast food, etc. And so understanding what it is that is driving why we want to fall for those things. And then recognizing the characteristics of what grifters, for lack of a better word, are using to sell us those things. With my students, I use something called inoculation theory, which is the idea that in education, if you expose people to bits of misinformation, then in the real world, they are able to identify that misinformation, so they don't fall for it. But I like to use something called active inoculation, which is where students create misinformation, because in the creation of the misinformation, they're able to spot it. So something like I have them create an advertisement for a product that's pseudoscience. I'll give them here's a weight loss supplement. So make an advertisement for a product that is supposed to help people lose weight. And so they figure out what the techniques used to sell that are, which tend to be things like an appeal to authority. So you've got to have somebody with an advanced degree, lab coats help, that kind of thing. Appeal to nature. This is an all-natural supplement or diet or something. And it's ancient wisdom. Our ancestors have been doing this for generations. Things like appeal to emotions, or make really vague claims. Things like increases energy and reduces fatigue and boosts immune system. These kinds of claims that are basically meaningless but are vague enough and broad enough that people think that that means it actually works. You put all this together into an advertisement and all of a sudden it's like, oh, in real life, I can see that, right? When I see an advertisement for a weight loss supplement, they're using those tricks that I know works because I use them in my own creation. In classrooms, that works really well. I would be interested to know if it might work with your clients. But creating misinformation, creating fake news, I have my students create conspiracy theories. When they're involved in the creation of misinformation, it helps them identify it in real life. Okay, let's see if there is anything else. Oh, Yeah, lifelong learners. Yeah, the good food, food thing, that dichotomy there is definitely a sign of a bad diet. Oh, get bad news. Yeah, thanks for posting that, Sergeant Scholar. Definitely get bad news is and go viral is another one where it's a game that has you create misinformation to see if it goes viral. Some red flag words that I teach my students about. Red flag words. Things like, well, there's vague claims. And red flags, I posted something this morning, is a great red flag word. Detox, right? Detoxify. What does that mean? It means something in a medical context, but it doesn't mean really anything in a supplement context. Things like, improves overall immune function, or one of the things that I teach my students to pay attention for is the telling people that everyone else is out to get you, or you can't trust anyone else. Like, we have this secret here that they don't want you to know, because that's not how the real world works. It actually shows a misunderstanding of the process of science. But appealing to conspiracy theories is, I call it the get out of jail free card for denial. Because when all else fails, if you want a claim to be true and the expert consensus isn't in line with that, well, they must all be conspiring against what I say. But we have the secret, and it's all natural. And the ancients have been using this for millennia, but they don't want you to know about it because of industry or big pharma or the FDA, those sorts of conspiratorial claims. How do we know if someone is a legitimate authority? For me, what I do with legitimate authority, thank you for that question. Again, I don't like authority because science doesn't have authorities. It has experts. And I think the use of the authority is a misunderstanding of how the average person interfaces with science. Like a Harvard scientist says, you'll see a headline that says something like that. And it's like, well, a Harvard person says this, so it must be true. But if they're making a claim that is not in line with the expert consensus, then it's a red flag for sure. When I hear a claim by a supposed authority, I may or may not look up the authority. I'll probably look up the claim and then see if the claim is in line with the expert consensus, either through things like meta-analyses and systematic reviews, or with position statements from the big, like the CDC or the FDA or the NIH or something like that. And so if this supposed authority is making a claim that's counter to that, then I'm really skeptical of it. And so they may be correct, right? The expert consensus might be wrong, and that's what deniers like to focus on, is, the Galileo effect, that, Galileo stood up against the consensus at the time. It's actually a misunderstanding, because Galileo was standing up to the church. The evidence convinced scientists. So it was really ideology that got in the way. But scientists, individual scientists that are counter to the consensus, like to point to Galileo and say, well, Galileo was right, so I must be right. And so if they're making a claim, though, that is counter to the consensus, that is an extraordinary claim. They may be right, but we need extraordinary evidence to back up their claim. Okay, anything else on here? Naturopaths. Yeah. So, naturopathy, I don't know a lot about naturopathy. If I might just move to something like homeopathy, which I know a little bit more about, I know naturopaths tend to use a lot of homeopathy. This idea of alternative medicine in general, if I back up, alternative medicine. Alternative medicine is called alternative medicine because it is not evidence-based. If it was evidence-based, it would be part of medicine. There's no conspiracy keeping treatments outside of people's reach. It's just that it doesn't have the evidence for that. But they short-circuit the process. They stand outside the process and they say you can't trust them because they're conspiring or they're out to get money. We're not, of course, but they're out to get money. This treatment is natural and has been used for hundreds or thousands of years. And we know it works because here's a testimonial, or here's a poorly designed study. And so, alternative medicine is generally pseudoscience, and it has the hallmarks of pseudoscience, things like it makes extraordinary claims, it uses a lot of anecdotes, it relies on logical fallacies. But back to why people fall for that. I mean, to me, that's the most important thing. If you've got somebody who's using something like naturopathy or homeopathy or something, the reason they're using that is because they have a need that's not being met. They have a health problem that maybe is really difficult to solve, and they haven't gotten the answers that they needed. Or even something really basic like our medical system, our doctors don't have as much time as they probably should have to talk to patients. Whereas naturopaths or homeopaths may spend an hour talking to patients. And so you get much more of a placebo effect. It feels like you're getting treated. You're feeling like someone is caring about the rest of what's going on in your life. But they thrive on distrust of science. So basically what they do is they use these fallacies. They use our biases, our wanting hope to sell us something on the premise that the medical establishment is not trustworthy. Scientists are not trustworthy. And it's really dangerous because you've got people who think that alternative medicine can treat cancer. Well, it can't. And people who use alternative medicine to treat cancer have higher death rates. So for me, the biggest thing is understanding what has brought someone to a fad diet or alternative medicine, a various form of pseudoscience, understanding the identity need, understanding the emotions behind it, and trying to meet them there to help them think through, use critical thinking, use metacognition, understand what their brain is up to, understand the techniques being used to sell them these different products. And most importantly, critical thinking is important, but critical thinking is only used when we want to use it. We have to be motivated to use it. So with my students, for example, I not only teach them how to critically think, but I'm constantly trying to reaffirm that the purpose of critical thinking is for them to make better decisions, to not fall for something that might be harmful. I'm really cheap. I don't like to spend my money on things that are a waste of money. So that's certainly a harm, but dying from an alternative treatment is definitely harm. Dying because you're not getting vaccinated is harm. Constantly falling for fad diets and going back and forth between different kinds of fad diets when it doesn't work is a form of harm. So motivating people to be able to turn on that part of the brain that the writer can think through those claims, that can understand what the elephant is doing, and can teach them for themselves how to make better decisions. And I think I'm about at the half hour. Just want to see if there's any last minute questions. I don't have very good tech skills, so I apologize for how long it takes me to get through this. How people can find a consensus. You know what? I am out of time, so I just want to post in the chat. I have an article that I wrote about, I wrote one about the danger of doing your own research, but then I realized people really do need to be able to find good information. So I wrote a follow-up to that on how to do your own research, and it's what the consensus is and how to find it. So I'm going to put that in the comments below. Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Build Up Dietitians, for hosting me today. Again, my website is thinkingispower.com, and on Facebook, Thinking is Power, and on Twitter at Thinking Powers. And thank you so much. I hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you on social.